Hi and welcome to the first video in the series on quilt bindings. Many of you asked for me to share the different ways that I bind my textile work, so I'm going to begin with binding with the backing fabric. This is probably the easiest way to bind a quilt, so great if you're a beginner. First off, make sure your work is ready for the binding, so give it a good iron on both sides. For this demonstration I'm binding a mini quilt, which I haven't quilted with the wadding, so you'll see me cut the wadding to the right size and then cutting the backing fabric after. You might have noticed this circular work before. It's appeared in another video, How to Master Needle Turn Applique. If you haven't checked that out yet, then you can do that here. I've layered my quilt top onto some cotton wadding and I'm using a quilter's ruler to measure and square everything up. It's important for me to make sure the circle is in the centre of the quilt. If you don't have a quilter's ruler or a rotary cutter, using a normal ruler, marking it with a pen and cutting with scissors is fine. You can also mark against some card that you know is at a right angle to make sure your corners are accurate. But if you are planning on making this kind of work often, then these tools will definitely make your life easier. Once you've squared everything up, place it on your backing fabric. My backing fabric has an overlap of 2 centimeters around each side of the square. That's just under 1 inch. Starting with the bottom, we're going to fold the raw edge towards our top fabric and gently finger press it. Try to leave a slight gap between the raw edge and your top fabric. This is to allow the fabric to bend around the wadding. This is especially important if your wadding is thick. If you fold it too tightly, then your fabric will buckle. My backing fabric is 100% linen, so it holds the crease really well, but if you need to, you can use an iron to press that down. Rotate your work and repeat the process on the opposite side. Next, we're going to take the folded edge and carefully fold that over the top fabric so that the raw edge is encased inside. Really, I should have pinned or tacked down the top piece to prevent it from moving, so you may need to do that, especially if your work is larger than mine. Pin your folded edge down to hold it in place, or if you have them, use quilter's clips. These are great for holding down bindings without having to pierce the fabric. Do the same on the opposite side. Take a thread that matches your work. If you want the thread to be invisible, it's best practice to match the thread to the colour of the binding rather than to the quilt top. Of course, it's absolutely fine to have visible stitches as well, whatever your preference is. I'm using a standard weight sewing thread. If I want my stitches to be more visible, I'll use a pearl cotton number 8 to make them slightly chunkier. I've knotted my thread and taken my needle into the corner where the edge is folded over. I'm whip stitching over the folded edge to secure it down. When I take my needle into the background, I'm not going through to the backing fabric at all. The needle is just going through the wadding, so the stitches will not be visible from the back. If you followed any of my needle turn applique videos, you will see that this stitch is exactly the same. Here's a closer view so you can see how the stitches look from the front and how they're not going through to the back. So my needle comes up through the fold, then I take it into the backing fabric, level with where the thread came out, through to just the wadding, and then catch the fold again and pull that nice and tightly. Again, back into the backing fabric, through the wadding and up through the fold. Stitch in this manner along the full length of the first side until you get to the corner. When you get there, take your last stitch into the corner of the wadding and carefully knot it a couple of times to secure it. That's your first side sewn down. You need to repeat this exact same process for the second side. Excuse me while I change locations. Now your first two sides are stitched down, nice and neatly with no visible stitches from the back. It's time to repeat that process on the remaining two sides, exactly as you did before. You're going to take those raw edges in and carefully fold them towards the top. This time you need to pay careful attention to the outer edges where there'll be a lot of bulk. You might find that the fabric tries to unfold itself slightly, which will distort the shape of the square. To reduce the bulk, take a pair of scissors and carefully snip off the corners. Begin to fold the sides down and pin in place or use your quilter's clips. I like to start in the centre and work outwards towards the corners. If you are finding the corners are still distorted, you can snip a little bit more fabric away or unfold it and just take the fold in slightly and then fold the edge back up, and that should solve your problem. It's worth taking your time with this, manipulating the fabric, because the overall finish will be much better. Poke in any frayed edges that are trying to make an appearance at this stage too. Do exactly the same for the opposite side. Check that everything's sitting nice and flat and use as many clips or pins as you need to secure things down before you begin sewing again. This time we're going to begin right in the corner, sewing up the side along the long edge and then back down the short side. I'm using my needle to poke in any frayed edges that are trying to stick out. I take my needle right into the corner. The knot is hidden under the binding. So I'm using a whip stitch and I'm trying to bind together the two outer edges and keeping the fabric that's folded tucked away inside. Keeping my stitches quite small I'm taking the needle through the fabric. Each time I do a stitch, I poke any of the folded fabric or frayed edges back inside. Once I come up to the corner, I'm ready to begin whip stitching across the long edge. And I do this in exactly the same way as we did before. It's a good idea to keep your stitches at the beginning a little closer together. Again, you can see how nice and neat that looks from the back because none of the stitches are showing through. I've gone ahead and stitched the last two sides down, and I'll now show you how to finish off the last corner. As you get to the corner, use your thumb and forefinger to hold it down and use the edge of your needle to poke in any frayed edges that are trying to stick out. I'm taking my last stitch right into the corner, and then, as we did before, sewing in a way so that the two outside layers are stitched together and the fold is encased inside. Pull the thread nice and tight each time. Your final stitch will go into the corner, and then you need to knot it once or twice to keep it nice and secure. And then take your needle right into the back to hide the end. Pull it nice and tight and trim, and you are done. So that is your finished mini quilt bound with the backing fabric. Nice neat corners with no stitches visible from the back at all. If, like me, you haven't quilted the 3 layers together, you might find that the quilt top has puffed up slightly, so just take your iron and give that a good press. So whether you've tried this on a smaller scale like I've done here, or if you're making a bigger quilt, I hope you found this tutorial useful. In the next video in this series, I will show you how to bind using a commercial binding and how to make your own binding strips. So make sure you are subscribed to my channel and toggle the button to receive notifications so you don't miss the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.